Maybe I need to start recording at some point. Yeah, I need to start recording separately.
Yeah, I think we actually
Okay. Does it see anything? Oh, I can see already.
Yeah, you should.
It's live.
Yeah, you should be seeing me. You should even be able to hear me. And I'm going to...
Maybe I should. Should I go to a different room and check that I can hear?
No, just try. I mean, I can turn off my... Well, I need to turn on...
Oh, you can check now, right?
We can check now, because it will be weird echo maybe, but...
Yes.
I mean, Florian could just say something. You would hear
Yes,
that.
of course, I can say something. You can say Test.
Yeah, but actually, I have Linux, so my audio from Firefox never worked before.
So you don't actually know whether it works.
Yeah.
Okay, let me go to the Zoom meeting and see. Hi, can everybody hear us? Okay, good. Good. All right.
Hello, I can hear you.
So I keep my speakers silent. Right?
Yeah. I couldn't actually hear Petter there. Did he say something? Oh, I don't know if he did say something.
Did say something?
Oh no, yeah, that works. That works. Thanks. Actually, I have to take the mask off. Yeah. So that seems to be working. Yeah, I just figured I'd turn on the stream already because like people can join.
That makes sense.
And
I think it's very nice to walk on a bench.
It is.
Like under the sun. Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Should I post the Zoom in the IRC channel?
What?
IRC channel?
Yeah.
Where?
No, just leave. Nah, it's fine. The Twitch link is better.
Do you expect anybody else to join?
Yeah, no.
No. No.
Maybe Martin.
No, I don't think you.
I haven't heard much from Marty, so I imagine he's
Maybe
still
Lara?
family.
Yes, I think so too.
I mean, does it hard to write in the channel? I mean,
No, if you are not against it,
Yes,
Yeah, go for
right.
it. Yeah, go for it.
just post it there. So the
should
the link
we write it on the SciPy? Slack.
2 minutes before the stream
Yeah.
starts, you start writing things on barriers.
You have the channel of the people which came to
So
know.
what is
I don't think
I think, no, I just wanted to reiterate it in the
Oh, yeah,
recorded
that
ones.
makes sense.
Like, I couldn't find where it was, so,
Okay, yeah, it's Twitch TV/PyPy project.
no, I mean, I couldn't find the link in the CoreDev Discord.
Oh yeah,
It was probably in the summary.
it probably is somewhere hidden. Got lost somewhere.
So, 2 minutes to go.
Yeah, and I don't. Yeah, well, it'll be confusing probably at some point because this kind of thing will happen.
Zoom link or Twitch stream?
Twitch stream. Yeah,
Where we get it? With the stream?
Twitch TV/PyPy project.
I haven't used.
We just don't know if the audio works.
Could you send it me? Yeah.
We hope it does.
Twitch TV
Yeah.
slash. Okay.
Could you go on the Twitch stream and check if the audio works? Does audio work for you in Firefox?
Yes.
Okay.
Should we join the Zoom call or not?
No. Yeah, and then when we just have.
No, of course, with microphone.
No, we have the
microphone.
feedback for everybody.
Microphone.
Okay, you get it. Okay, good, it works. So, great. Audio works, kind of, I guess. I should sit. I should sit further away so that everybody is in the picture, I guess.
I wonder whether we should all come closer. Like,
I think it's okay.
yes. Now the question is whether they can hear us if I speak. They can hear me.
I don't know.
I don't have to shout more.
Can everybody hear Anto when he speaks?
Hello, do you hear me?
I can.
Okay, good. That's good.
Good.
That's great. It's a bit of a hacked setup here. It's a sprint setup, yes. So then I don't have a clock. Somebody just tell me
It
when
is
it's-
already 3 p.m., so we can begin.
It's for.
We can just begin
I think so, yes.
and wait for anybody else, I guess.
Oh, yeah, it might be Mark, I guess, maybe.
Maybe. Okay, let's give it another minute or so.
That's Discord. Oh, you could invite him to it as well. You can join.
Oh, okay. Like the modern kids.
It's the
Yeah,
it's
like Tim,
it's
Tim is using it. I've seen.
Yes,
just
I-
not the server, but I have to see you there too.
yes. It's
It's
the
a yellow-
problem is that it starts to get a very
yellow
long list.
draft install.
It's a very long list of things to be on. Yes. And there's another Electron thing to install, basically.
Is it electronic?
Is it? I don't know. But
Does
it looks like a web page.
Does anybody use Matrix? Which in theory
I was using it for a while, but
No,
would work.
no, not really.
it
Hi,
kind
Victor.
of did work. But at some point I just. Okay, I see Victor Stinner joined.
Yes,
I
he's down there. Yeah. Oh, I should record this, right? That was the. I promised to record this on the.
Oh, this is Inception.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
talk, and then we have Mark.
Okay. So shall we get started then? Right. Hello, everyone. We're not going to do a round of updates of intros, right? It's just so we've been for the past 4 days sprinting on HPy a little bit, and I just wanted to take about 10, 15, 20 minutes maybe to go over some of the things that we discussed, because besides hacking, we kind of tried to get clear on some of the high-level goals and motivations for HPy and what we want to do with it, or what we want to ask other people to do with it. So yeah, I'll go over this quickly, ask questions in the middle or at the end. As I said, I'll try not to take very long for this. So yeah, however if you have a very long question, very open-ended thing, maybe hold it to the end if that's okay. So the thing that we start from is obviously the C API has multiple kind of groups of people interested in it, stakeholders. There's obviously the CPython implementers who use it. There's the Python extension packages that use it. But then there's also Python users that kind of interact with it through those packages that they're interested in. And then alternative implementations also have some interests. And these interests, there's kind of, some of them cause tension, which is why we're here. That's why we're doing this. And so some of these things that people want, extension developers obviously use the extension API sometimes to just link to native library with the best possible performance, because that gives you a native interface to CPython. But extension developers also have an interest in their binaries to continue working across as many versions of Python as possible, because there was discussions over and over about how many binary wheels some packages provide or have to provide, and if the binary interface to Python changes or between different Python implementations is different, that's just another multiplier in this matrix of binary wheels that you have to provide. Then extension developers often, but maybe some extension developers are not necessarily familiar with actual CPython implementations, so some of the debugging features they might need are different from the features that CPython core developers might need. And also for extension developers, it's nice to have a small API, kind of this there should be one obvious way to do it. And there are examples in the APIs that current extension developers use where it may be a little bit confusing about like what should I use in what situation. And here's just one example with PyObject set item versus PyDict set item versus PyModule object. Like when do you use which one of these and why? And it's kind of sometimes a bit difficult to explain. And then the other thing important for extension developers, if API changes, and even more so if API were to change, For extension developers, it's important to not have pressure to migrate like everything all at once and immediately, but it'd be nice if there can be like a smooth migration path to any new APIs or APIs that there are. Now for CPython core developers, implementers of CPython, the C API has to enable also evolution of Python, of the Python implementation. So Python data structures need to be able to change, the interpreter needs to be able to change, maybe GC strategies or object representations. All these things may have to change over time as the implementation evolves, and ideally that should be achievable without breaking extensions every time, because that just leads to a lot of pushback from extension developers. And then, I mean, transitively also users, I guess. And then for other Python implementations, like GraalPy and PyPy kind of were involved from the start with HPy, and for us, the one desire for a Python C API is that it's possible for us to even implement it, so we can be compatible mostly with Python extensions, and ideally, it's possible to implement it with reasonable performance, so like not hundreds of times slower than CPython. And also a nice feature for mainly us is that the API kind of safeguards against relying on accidental leaky abstractions, like whether things are moving in memory or something like that, whether pointers are moving in memory or something like that. So yeah, things that might work on one implementation but not on others. Or it might not even work in future Python implementations because maybe they're just not guaranteed, just accidental. And the idea really with HPy is we can solve these issues. So these conflicting needs, this tension we can solve by introducing something like HPy or HPy, and which just separates the interpreter API from the extension API. And this way, really the idea is that we can start to evolve both of these separately and make all parties happy. Explicitly, non-goals, however, for HPy are, it's not meant to be like a better higher level abstraction than the current C API. It's actually trying to be close to the current C API wherever it can, because that makes it also easy to migrate to it. So we're not trying to revolutionize the way C extensions are written. We're not trying to change like core concepts. Things like how do you do exceptions and stuff like that. That's explicitly nothing that we even thought about much, because it's right now the goal was to make it also easy to see how what you get from the current C API to HPy. HPy also, because it still will be like, still is a bit of an abstraction, we're not trying to support extensions that want to expose internals. So there are extensions like for some debugging support, for profiling, deep viewing, they want to expose some information maybe about ref counts or something like that. And that's just not something that HPy wants to do. And finally, we have something right now, but it's not, we don't consider this perfect. And what we try to do with HPy is we try to make it so it doesn't have to be perfect right now, but it can evolve into something that gets closer and closer to that without breaking backwards compatibility anytime. And so what we did so far, and why we believe that HPy is working in that for these goals, is we have ports of UJSON, of Pillow, of Kiwi Solver. We have ported a good chunk of NumPy and Matplotlib. So some of these are done all well along, and they achieve those goals that we have. We have binaries that work across implementations. We have a compilation mode where they have zero overhead on CPython. So the API we have currently, while we don't consider it like complete or perfect, it seems one solution to those problems that we say. So what we're planning to do now is improve how we document all of this stuff and report and explain these goals and the strategy. We try to achieve them with HPy in like a PEP, open a pull request at some point, and then just use that as a platform to have plenty of time to discuss that with everybody who would be involved with this. And then if there would be at some point agreement to move forward towards an officially separate extension API, which of course we would love to be HPy, but it doesn't have to be, then over time, stability guarantees from the implementation API of CPython could start to be removed or weakened, and then at that point, CPython could start moving along faster and faster with its own evolution of the implementation, because it wouldn't have to break extensions all the time. So yeah, this is kind of the three things. We would like, why we started this is we would like this CAPI problem to be solved. We think HPy is a good way to do this. So we think HPy is a good platform to evolve with everybody's input to do that. And so we think that something, either HPy or something like it, would be useful as a kind of more official project to be this separate C API as a, I don't know, as a PSF project, or like governed like PyPA or PyCA, I don't know. Yeah, so this is kind of the high level overview part. And I just wanted to, because our documentation isn't great, and probably people have seen like snippets, but not any HPy extensions maybe, or hadn't had time to look at extra extensions that reported much. Wanted to just briefly show a bit of code that demonstrates the core technical HPy ideas, three of which listed here. So the first one is that every function that deals with the Python APIs takes an additional argument as opposed to the current C API, and that is an HPy context. And this is basically our ABI compatibility layer. This is ensured because there are no unresolved symbols in the shared library. Everything is called in the universal kind of forward compatible, always binary compatible mode. Everything is resolved through this context. So ABI compatibility can be ensured simply by keeping the layout of this context stable. So adding new APIs at the end, or versioning the context so that when a C extension is loaded, the runtime knows which layout of the context the extension expects, and then just handing it the right context. The other one is handles. That's where the name HPy comes from, handle py. And these handles are just opaque structs, but they only have like one 64-bit field. They're not pointers, so they are more comparable to file descriptors. And so this way, the internal representation of objects doesn't even accidentally leak. And the third core technical idea was always that if you port an extension to HPy, you can still compile it using the CPython ABI mode, not the HPy ABI mode, and then it will have absolutely zero overhead compared to currently. Yeah, and I'll just go quickly over a bit of that's Inception, over a bit of code to demonstrate that. So I'm going to assume that everybody's aware of how C extensions are written. So what we have here is we have a little porting guide thing with a tiny extension that we port step by step, and I'm just going to show the final step because I assume everybody's aware of how that would look in current C API. So this is an extension that has just point objects that have X and Y values and some object of interest, just a reference to another Python object. And the idea here is, so the first thing is, what you can see is in the structure definition for a type in C, we don't have this PyObjectHead macro anymore, because that would expose kind of how the layout is on the binary level, and so we don't have that anymore, because in HPy will just make sure that when running on CPython that still exists, obviously, but other Python implementations like PyPy just don't have it. And then there are handles for other objects, and in local variables, local handles, short-lived handles are called just HPy, and then we have separate types of handles when these object references are stored, for example, in C structures. Like here is HPy field. And the reason we have that is so that long-lived references can be made known easier to create different GC strategies. And then the way you access them also helps GCs. Then the next interesting thing is, how do you now, so in the CPython API, right, if you define your own type, then you get a PyObject star, and you can just, if you know it's your own type, you can just cast it to your own type, and then you can access the struct fields. But here we don't have that anymore. Instead, you use this HPy type helpers macro, and that defines the casts to get from an HPy handle that represents your own type back to the C structure, so you can access the structure. And yeah, and we can see where that is used here in this point object is struct, where, okay, I get an HPy handle for the self, and I know it's a point object, so I have this helper point object as struct, which gives me, again, the pointer to the structure defined up here.
Can you just scroll upward there?
Yes.
Zoom in a second. Oh, wait.
Okay. Oh, sorry. I didn't realize Zoom is cutting this off a little bit. Okay. I was pointing to this point object as struct cast. Another thing here we have, so when you define the type with the C API, you have slots and get sets and methods, and this distinction isn't that strong anymore in HPy. They kind of still shows up, because when you define one of them, you have this macro HPy-def slot, or HPy-def get for get sets, or HPy-def method. But the functions themselves are all just put in the same array and then defined. And these macros, they help with boilerplate that you would usually have to do otherwise. What else interesting here? So this init function, for example, one thing that's interesting here is when, rather than comparing pointers to null, to just if they're null pointers, you can't do that anymore. They're opaque structs, so there's helpers for this, or things like you don't need to incref when you store a field in an object in a C struct, because you're going to have to use API function like HPy field store anyway, which on CPython won't do anything else other than let's just store the pointer and incref, but on other implementations it will do like a store barrier or something. So these are, yeah, that's just some implementations. One thing to note is maybe that's interesting is that here, again, we tried to make the API, we tried really not to revolutionize anything. The API is pretty much the Python API, the CPython API, just with an H in front and a context argument wherever we could make it work like that. So it's, again, trying to make it simple to migrate. Similar with here, this HPython no args and HPython bar args, and we have HPython O, kind of similar to how you would define methods in CPython API right now. And then the defines is, like I said, it's just a list of all the slots and get sets and methods in one array, and then the type spec is very, very similar to current heap type specs. So same kind of idea, really. Yeah, there's not really much more to do. Again, module creation, all of that stuff looks very similar on purpose. And one thing here, for example, what you can see is rather than using PyModule at object for something, we just have set attr. Because we figured we didn't see, it's not visible right now. Okay, let me move it up somewhat. No. Yeah. It's confusing. I'm confused. Okay, this HPy set attr here. Again, one of these things where we figured it's easier to first go for a smaller API, and then only if there's a particular reason we would add like something else we're feeling. Yeah, that's all I had for, and it's 20 minutes roughly. So I hope we can have, yeah, time for questions basically.
Mark basically said he wants to get away from slow.
Mhm.
Extend through that. Just define callables and other operations, the input management. Yeah. I guess we agree, right?
Yeah.
I would say we still need a description, like a specification for what we want to have in the type code. That's what those define.
Yeah,
please.
go ahead.
I think that, I mean, this is something that we consider that you specify things, like instead of saying that you specify pp hpy slot add, you could write down the road, like as you write in Python, and then you do the right thing. But we also thought that it might be harder or something for existing extension to port, so we choose the current solution to minimize the difference somehow. But I think it's open to discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think
That's the reasoning.
I mean, already in HPy, we removed the necessity for the underlying implementation to have slots as they exist now. I mean, you don't have to have slots in your Pi object with HPy as it is right now. You just need to be able to implement the behavior of slots given the function for that slot. I'm not sure if that's
Yeah, I think it's a
good
bit.
enough for Mark now, but it's kind of the API doesn't. I mean, HPy doesn't expose slots the way CPython does. It simply gives you a way to say, I want this functionality. Here is my C function.
Yeah, and in some sense, right now, it actually helps with migration because it makes it easier to on CPython keep the same behavior as before. But yeah, on GradPy, for example, we don't do that. We don't implement slots the way CPython does at all, and more than we just make it in the methods. So yeah.
Next question. Like, don't he ask...
Wait, Mark was gonna.
Oh.
I think Mark was gonna say something.
I was just going to say that I'd like to abandon slots in CPython as well. They just
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's in the NumPy port actually. That's been the way slots work actually has in the NumPy port has led to a bit of trouble actually because they do try to access it directly, and then and there's a slight difference in how slots work with heap types versus static types, and it's very subtle and not.
I mean, I think we had two problems, right? Like, first, there are several slots that map to the same magic function, and NumPy like uses this, and then NumPy is also using the slots to decide which type it has and do some shortcuts there. So that's something, that's hard for HPy. Okay, next question for on this topic. So Donghi asks, like CPI supports module state and multiphase init. Can you do this in HPy as well? So you will. We are basically working on that. So the module state thing is something we are discussing since a month actually. So we are not sure about what's the best solution there. Really have a module state, or should we have another specification of what you want to have, and should that be provided in the context? As in the meantime, we like as a maybe temporary thing, we introduced HPy Global that allows you to store something into a C global and load it from there. So you will be able to have do something with the module state, but we don't know yet exactly in which form. And concerning a multiphase init, that's something we're actually working on right now in the spring. So that's gonna happen, I guess.
So maybe if I can quickly comment on that, the multiphase init pull request is now on HPy. So that's what we would like to polish, and I think the multiphase init should be really the default, and that should be the only way to init a module in HPy. And the module state, I mean, that's something that we just need to polish, but there's no question that we want to have a module state, or a way to encapsulate the global state such that you can have it per let's say, context, right? So we envisage that HPy will support sub-interpreters or similar things, like say running multiple, for example, GraalPy can be embedded into one process multiple times. So there could be multiple and multiple separated Python GraalPy instances within one process. And with HPy, we could load an extension into the process and run it separately in those separate GraalPy instances. Right? So that's definitely a use case for HPy. So I would say we're just ironing out the details, but there's no question that we want to support this.
Does that answer the question? Yeah.
There's a
Victor also asked in the chat that he wanted to ask it on the call, just how does PyPy and GraalPy ship HPy?
Well, we just ship it with the interpreters. So right now the structure is that in the HPy repository, basically you have the HPy APIs that you need for developing an extension, and you have the implementation of HPy for CPython in that repository. And this part, the implementation for the Python implementation, that just ships with PyPy and GraalPy. Yeah, so on PyPy and GraalPy is just there out of the box. And,
what I don't get is about versioning. Is it okay if CPython ship an old version of HPy, which is incomplete and has bug? Is it possible to have two implementation of HPy on the same system, like one from Python and one installed somewhere else?
So the idea is that it is possible for example, for an implementation to ship multiple versions of HPy, so that you would be, if we do breaking changes, since the extension declares or which version of HPy was compiled against, the implementation can then give it the HPy context to give it the API that it needs to still be compatible. So that's the one thing. The other thing, about shipping an old version of HPy, well, I guess you would what would happen if you compile against a newer version of HPy that uses newer API? Then yes, it won't work on the old.
No, but you can detect it at low time.
Yeah, you would detect it at low time. Yes, yes.
HPy version 4, and
no, it wouldn't just crash, obviously.
Okay, I don't have it.
Yeah.
I think we end up with something a bit like oldest supported NumPy. So
Yes.
if you compile, if you are a C extension and you want to support, say, Python 3.5 and later, then you compile against the HPy that Python 3.5 supports,
Yes.
and then any later Python loads your extension module and sees, oh, you need this old version of the HPy API, here you go, and
Yes.
things work.
Yeah.
Maybe one interesting thing to note is that you can run multiple HPy versions within one process. So you could load, with this design, you could load 2 extensions, and each of them requests different version of HPy, and they can just run. You just create 2 different HPy contexts. They will be like different in their layout and what API they provide, but that's all fine. Like those 2 extensions could run together in one process with different HPy versions.
Yeah, so I guess
my main issue with CPython is that if we decide to ship one version of HPy, like HPy 1, for example, it will not change in this Python version. For example, in Python 3.12, we will ship HPy 1. And if tomorrow, if there is HPy 2, which is more complete, we cannot update it anymore. In CPython, the policy is usually to not change anything because it's considered like a new feature. So my question is if HPy is mature enough and complete enough, if it would make sense, according to you, to ship HPy in CPython.
I mean, I think right this second, no.
Yes. Not today.
not today, but I mean, we're starting these kinds of conversations now precisely so that we can make changes needed that people want now, rather than kind of waiting until it's too late. But on the other hand, we don't have to have absolutely everything complete, because initially, if HPI doesn't work, someone can continue to use maybe the existing C API and until HPI has the feature it needs. I mean, I think we would like to launch a lot more feature complete than we are now.
But maybe as a data point, we importing NumPy, that was really the big thing lately, where we had to add a lot of new APIs and things to HPI. And after like the first 15,000 lines of code were ported, this started to slow down a lot again. So it's basically like we haven't been adding stuff anymore for a few months now, and been just progressing. So and again, it was always this is kind of always the same with every big thing that we start to port. But like the more things we started porting, the more complete it feels, because But it's hard. It's really hard to tell when is it complete enough without.
I mean, I think once we have, say, a NumPy port that we're happy with, we can say that's pretty. Nothing is ever complete, but if you can run NumPy happily on HPI, you can do quite a lot of stuff already.
Yes. Yeah. So that's and then again with the whole backward compatibility story, the hope is that if we're complete enough to have ported NumPy, then it's complete enough definitely to use for many things, and then if other things are needed, they can always be added to the next version, and then it's just that extensions just shouldn't use it until they drop the oldest version of HPI, ABI, that was shipped in some version of Python. I would say.
I'm sorry, but I didn't get something. If CPython decides to ship HPI, is it possible to install the second version of HPI aside, like using pip or something? And in that case, which HPI version will be used? Because for me, it's okay to have an old version of HPI by default, but maybe some users want to get a more recent version, like an opt-in update. Is it something doable?
Okay, let's see if I understand the question. So currently, the CPython implementation of HPI is in the HPI repository. And actually, we have two implementations of CPython. One with target the CPython API, so it creates extension module out there now, and the other which implements the universal API on top of CPython. And in theory, you could ship it separately from CPython forever, and then it means that the HPI implementation on CPython uses the CPython internal or whatever API to implement it. And we could ship it separately forever, and then you decide which version of HPI to install on your VLAN. Or we could say that CPython ships one by default, and you can upgrade it. Or you can install. I'm sure that there will be technical details to be solved, but in theory it is possible. Of course, the more the HPI and CPython diverge, the harder it becomes to map one API on top of the other. But in principle, it should be possible.
Well, and this mapping, I mean, we're already doing this for PyPy and WildPy, so that's why we're doing these things in parallel. It's definitely possible, and not like we're trying to make it also not too hard, because it's not too tight to one implementation. And then also because you're decoupling these APIs now, right? There's two things. You compile against one HPy version, but then that HPy version also supports different versions of CPython, right? We have that right now, even where we for example, we need for HPy this new API that's in 3.12 to make a heap type with a custom meta class, and we use that on 3.12. And anything older, we have a little hack that I can't remember. Somebody put.
Like potentially something that could happen is that in CPython 3.12, you add a new API code, then you can ship an HPy version which runs on 3.11, and that's this API call, and it implements it in terms of the existing one. Like you can do things like this, because everything is goes through the context, so you can decide which function to call.
I think it would be great for HPy adoption to put it in CPython, because if something is provided directly by Python, people are more likely to use it. Seems like it's like an official solution.
I don't think it's a very good idea at this moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, but when it will be a good moment, because it's a work in progress.
And it'll always be. Maybe it's a good idea to have CPython only expose private API and have HPy and maybe even the stable API as separate layers on top, regardless of which project provides those.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's to some extent exactly how kind of HPy gets supported by CPython is to some extent up to the CPython core developers. Or, I mean, we're very happy to help and write code, but we are, I guess, not the experts in the maintenance of CPython. And so we would like guidance about, like, how would you like it put in? And obviously that also requires just having conversations like these so that we can all try and get the big picture.
Yeah. Do we want HPy and CPython at all? I mean, is it the right API? I mean, HPy is driven to a large extent by PyPy and GraalPython, not by sort of an concept of an ideal API. For CPython, we're in no rush. This is the difference, is that CPython can wait 5-10 years for a new API because there already is an API that everyone's using anyway. So from our point of view, I think, and it's much better to take our time and come up with like a perfect, not there is such a thing, API, rather than have something kind of works. So yeah, maybe never for HPy. That doesn't mean that HPy can't be widely available and used, though.
So one thought to that was that if a separate extension API and ABI were to be introduced, my personal impression was that it would take a while, though, to deprecate the stability guarantees of the current APIs and ABI. And so from, like, I don't know, if I consider, like, what if we had a perfect extension API right now, I would guess that it would still take at least 5, 6, 7 years to actually lift the stability guarantees of the current one, maybe, but I don't know. But yeah, maybe I'm just completely viewing that wrong. But
yeah, probably at least that long.
Yes.
And so with, yeah, as we said, like, we're trying not to have a perfect thing right now, but what we're really trying hard is to have something right now that wouldn't ever break again, and where, like, as we get more and more perfect, binaries, like, if somebody compiles against HPy right now and never recompiles the binary, that binary will still be supported in 10 years' time, because it'll declare, okay, I just need this really old context of HPy, and then we just handle that old context rather than whatever new cool stuff we come up with. But yeah, and yeah, it remains to be proven that works.
Well, there's one little problem with that, which is your stability promises are stricter than Python itself, right? If you write a Python program now, might break in a few years.
Yes. Well, okay, that was another discussion we actually had in this sprint, was what do we mean by stability? And maybe all we mean is you will load the binary, and the binary will load, and we can offer all the function pointers still in the context, but maybe at some point those function pointers will start to raise runtime errors because it just say this entire thing was removed from Python, the language. There's just, this entire concept doesn't exist anymore, but at least it's not at least you can get like a nice Python level runtime error rather than just the binary doesn't load or it crashes or something. So that was one thing. Yeah, but so I guess by stability, what we really mean is this
Yeah,
At
that's
least- yeah.
that's also what CPython stable ABI does.
I actually have a question for Mark. What are the big differences between HPy and the mythical Perfect C API? Because we've tried to keep like the small things the same to use porting, but a lot of the big changes that seem worthwhile having, like to have the opaque context and such, have been made. So what are the big picture changes that I guess you would see in the Perfect API?
Well, to start with, I don't know what the perfect API is. The API is hard to answer, but error handling is the obvious one. The current error handling thing is error prone, ironically. So yeah, the idea that you sort of set and fetch errors out of some sort of side channel is just not a good API. I think there's issues of the handling of handles. That there's no ability to sort of consume those, so that there's additional overhead. Now, I understand that you want an API, convenience API that is consistent, but might be additional room for a more efficient thing that explicitly consumes or does other things with references. I mean, you either consume or you don't really. Obviously, returning a borrowed reference is that's just unsafe. So we wouldn't want to do that. I think that's it. I mean, there's obviously little details like sort of consistent naming and so on, but I mean, obviously you're working on that anyway. So I think that's it for now that I can think of off the top of my head.
Sweet, thanks.
I just want to add a note, basically. The first is that the reason why the error codes are the same as now is, again, because we want to minimize the effort that people need to do to rewrite the extension. Of course, we came from the point of view of we came out of the blue and we asked the whole Python community to rewrite their extension. So let's try to ask them to not too much. But if, as Python community, we decided the new error handling scheme is better and we convince that extension developers that it's a good idea for them, I feel that in HPy we are open to this. Like, it's not that HPy, a current API, is fixed in the stone. I would be happy to say that HPy is a different error handling scheme. But we need to ask the question by ourselves: is it good or bad for extension developers? I don't know. But from the HPy point of view, I don't think that we have any particular preference on one or the other. And that said, like the HPy architecture doesn't prevent what is in the future, because I can imagine having an HPy version 2 which uses a different error scheme, and then okay, people need to migrate to the HPy version 2 if they want to use this new API. But the HPy version 1 will continue to work because we just ship to different contexts, and every context has the correct behavior. So the way HPy is moving to doesn't prevent to do these kind of changes in the API.
No, I guess not. It's efficiency. Peter looked like he had his hand up at one point.
Yeah, well, that's more of a comment. That's what we really should be thinking about is what is the API preventing us from doing? What can't we implement as a layer on top of the existing API? Because if we can implement it as a layer, or if we can implement the old API as a layer on top of the new one, then the migrations will be much easier than currently. So if we move to, for example, functions that will take contexts and no like direct data accesses, that will come a long way to enabling HPy or a lot of different projects. Like Cython could use this, and then we can look for the perfect API and just implement it and not worry that much about backwards compatibility.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is our hope and our plan.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there are a lot of details to get right.
So that's why I'm saying that's why I think I don't think HPy would be a good addition to CPython itself, but CPython should enable writing a layer like this.
I mean, I think it would be an advantage to see Python eventually, maybe not right now, if it did directly provide the HPy ABI, because then it would be able to evolve its own internals and wouldn't have to keep its current sort of API promises and memory layouts and things. Obviously, that is quite a long way into the future, and you could imagine a intermediate period where sort of HPy lives outside of the core Python repo, but kind of we work together to sort of provide kind of official sort of HPy support, and then maybe at some distant point it eventually kind of moves into CPython.
So I think you're mixing two things a bit. First one is enabling HPy. First one is enabling HPy or another better API layer, and it's deprecating the current API.
Sorry, Mark, you broke up a little bit. Could you just repeat? Oh, sorry, that was Peter.
I think, okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So I think you're mixing together two things. The first one is adding a new layer like HPy or Mark's better API or some kind of better API. And the second one is deprecating the current API.
Yeah,
right?
yes, these are two different, yeah. Well, we're hoping to achieve both of these goals with the same.
Or unstable API. Some enables HPy with the guarantees it needs. Then we wouldn't. Then we would be able to deprecate the current stuff, even without incorporating HPy itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think I completely agree with that. I mean, we need to first give people somewhere to migrate to before we even think about taking away what they have now.
Yeah. I guess for us the question is that's where we need also especially your input is what do you think HPy would have to do to be that useful thing where people could say, yeah, it is like it's not like it might go away tomorrow because there is some thinking across Python implementations in CPython core, in GraalPy and PyPy, and across maybe some of the extension developers that yes, this is the right direction, and it's not gonna suddenly just stop being the thing that we have to go back to CPython API and ABI. That's, yeah.
I don't think I'm the best person to ask that.
No. I mean, you in the like.
I think what we want to do is we want to be able to come up with a way that we would like to ask people to write their C extensions. So to come up with the kind of ABI, and we could say to people, please use this ABI. That would be good for them, but it would also be good for all of the Python implementations, so including CPython.
So my first suggestion is write the documentation. I don't think you'll get too much pushback from the Python C or CPython C API people. A lot of them are here already, so yeah, I think HPy is pretty good as a layer on top of the CPI. If you want to get it into CPython itself, that'll be a much harder conversation, but I don't think you really need that.
If you ask people what they'll want from a C API, they'll just tell you what we've already got, because that means they don't have to do any work. So you need to sell it, and reduced errors and development time is, I think, got to be the selling point. So the fact that you've already got the sort of debug thing with a handle is a big selling point. If there's any others, you should sort of push those.
Yeah, so one thing is I think with the wheels, with the binary wheels, was the hope that, because there was this discussion about cryptography, they have like 12 binary wheels for the stable ABI, and then if you could, like with HPy, you could have those same binary wheels, but they would also just those same 12 wheels would work then also across PyPy and GraalPy, and then we could promise they would even work if ever there's another CPython ABI version. We would, like, on the HPy level, we could make sure, yes, it works against CPython ABI 3 and ABI 4, so you don't even have to recompile for that. And so it will work on 3.6 and 3.20 or 3.40 or whatever. You know.
I mean, it would be also nice to not have to frantically recompile whenever
Yes.
CPython is released. And it's actually quite a big problem. So one of the packages I work on depends on NumPy and SciPy. So we can't release support for, say, Python 3.12 until both NumPy and SciPy kind of also release support. And yeah, so that's currently a bit of a painful scramble, and usually our users are left with a couple of weeks where they can't. Thank you.
I wanted to put you a bit in the picture. Yeah. All right.
Maybe we should just mention that we are writing kind of, I mean, you mentioned this in the talk, but maybe just to say, we are writing PEP kind of specifically just to make efforts more visible and more documented.
Yeah. As a documentation kind of discussion platform thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and as a way of getting feedback.
Yeah.
I think the one place where we do definitely need at some point to integrate with CPython is just on how to import the HPy universal extensions once they're built. I mean, there doesn't have to be a lot of code in CPython, but somehow we have to provide like an import hook without bothering users too much. And perhaps if anyone has suggestions on how to do that, that would be kind of very much appreciated.
I mean, the interpreter state object is a natural place to basically just jam in all the HPy context function pointers. I mean, how many of you? How big is it? How big an object is it?
Yeah, pretty.
Context big.
Yeah, 260. It's basically all the API functions, right?
Which is, you said about 200. Oh, so it's a few kilobytes. 3-4 kilobytes. Okay, well that's not really going to kill anyone. Yeah, it's not great for locality of reference, but we can also do some tricks like negative offsetting and stuff. So
yeah,
that could work.
Yeah, we also discussed that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and I guess the other question at some point for us was going to be like, if this evolves into something where more people agree, whether this that this is like a good project for people to base C extensions on, whether it should like stay under the HPy umbrella or HPy project umbrella, or whether it should like go into another umbrella at some point. That's another question we had. Like I don't know, PSF or whatever. Like or PyPA
one other thing. Okay, so what's the runtime overhead of using the non-portable version? If I use the API but compile for a specific version of CPython, what's the overhead?
So there, for the benchmarks that we have, where we run KiwiSolver, Matplotlib, there's just no overhead. I mean, some of the tinier benchmarks change, and sometimes they're faster and slower, but that seems to be like the usual effect of I reorder all my C code into different orders of functions, and then tiny benchmarks change drastically.
I think
So
that benchmark in which the HPy version is faster.
Yeah, they're, especially the KiwiSolvers, like and Matplotlib also. There was someone suddenly it's faster on the, which doesn't make sense. It's the same API.
It makes sense because you change stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You change stuff, but it's not. Yeah.
But you're seeing effectively not near zero, but actually zero overhead.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And then in the universal mode, it's this addition. Mostly in the universal mode, it's the indirection through the context, and that now ingress decrefs are not macros.
Yeah. But I mean, there's going to be a cost there, and it's not as if it's a high cost because previously there was no way of doing it. So whatever the cost is, it's still an improvement.
Yes, that's what we were thinking.
And I think my ask from the CPython core developers would be to have a couple of core developers who are really interested in the interpreter just participating in kind of HPy discussions, because HPy has to work for all of the interpreters, and we've got kind of like PyPy core people and GraalPython core people, and obviously we can see what is currently in CPython, and we know CPython somewhat well, but it would be really nice to have people who have an eye on the future of the CPython interpreter involved in HPy decision making, so that they can also say like, there, that doesn't work well for us, and then we can think more.
Yeah, so I guess the question is like, if somebody has time, or if at least somebody would be not opposed to us mentioning them from time to time on GitHub, and then taking a little time to read where we mentioned them and see if they have some ideas.
Well, I think I've already
yes,
basically
yes.
announced my intentions. So
Yes.
yes, count me in.
And we're very happy about that. Yes.
Yeah, we're super happy.
Yes, Peter, you're right.
Yeah, count me in as well.
Okay, cool. Very good. Great. Good.
Yeah, and then I think sort of not maybe right this second, but in the near future, it would be somehow nice to officialize the fact that HPy is not kind of a few people in a back, I mean, as Tim said, not a few people in the back room, and is really kind of open, and it doesn't have to be under the PSF. It could be more like PyCa or PyPA, or I'm not. Maybe the question for us as a group is like, what do we want that to look like, or do we not care, or
yeah, or maybe say differently. We are asking the Python community, please rewrite your extensions, because at some point we would like that everybody uses HPy or whatever new API we can come up with. So what is the best way to convince people that this is a way forward?
well, also not to convince people, but to make sure that they can have a say.
Yes, exactly. To ensure that they know it. Everything is blocking.
Oh, what happened?
No, did the call die?
Did the call die?
Did the internet die?
Yeah, the internet died. Oh no.
Can you hear me?
Looks like our internet died for a second there.
Oh,
sorry.
Welcome back.
Which stream is done as well?
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, let's see if I can get it back. How do I get it back here? Zoom. How do I do it? Oh, okay.
Did the Twitch stream
Well,
die?
The
I
Twitch
think
stream.
that you have to present Zoom into
The stream
Zoom.
is on again. Okay. Okay. Sorry.
How much of what I say do you hear?
So maybe
Okay,
just.
so yes, I will try to repeat. So basically, my point is that basically what we are trying to say is that we are trying to tell the Python community you should rewrite your extensions. And of course, it's a big ask. And one way to make sure for them that it's something stable and will live for a long time, well, is to make it kind of official. And so I don't know what is the best way to achieve this goal. Could be to write a PEP, and the PEP says in 2040 HPy will be the default API for Python, or could be that we ship it with the Python interpreter, or it could be that the HPy repo lives under github.com/psf or /Python. I don't really know what is the answer to this, but it would be nice to have a way to tell people, yes, we as Python community, like a broader Python community, we decide that this is the way to go. And CPython needs to have a big say in this, of course.
yeah. There is the issue of the double port, in that people have to port to HPy and then port again to the sort of ideal API. Now, hopefully, the question is, where do you want to put more effort? Do you want to push HPy more towards sort of potential ideal, or do you want to keep HPy closer to CPython so that API, so people have to do less work? It seems to be the latter is your preferred option.
Yeah, that's been our default, but we can also push it a little bit in the other direction, because it is a real, as you said, a real trade-off to be made here between kind of making things nice now and making it easy to port. And there is a trade-off, so we can push that line in different directions.
And I think that basically the topic is the more official we are, the most we can ask people.
Yeah, I guess.
If HPI is just a project in a corner, Peter is dying again. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's really.
Yeah, I can hear.
Okay.
Yeah, you can hear.
So if HPI is a project in the corner, we cannot ask people to rewrite everything very, very deeply. But if the Python community says, yes, we want in 10 years, we want HPI to be the standard API for Python, then we are in a position that we can ask people, yes, please do bigger rewrites because it's for
everybody's good.
For everybody good, yes. And they will be more easily convinced. So from this
think
point of
that
view, yeah.
there will always be a better API on the horizon, right? And it's,
Agreed.
it's there'll be another one that people should port to. So maybe it's more important to keep backwards compatibility, make it possible to run one with the other, than telling people to rewrite perfectly good extensions now.
Yeah.
And the governance question, whether like the project should be moved to BSF or Python, like on GitHub and whatnot, like it's not just kind of where the story on GitHub, because it's already on GitHub. It's really about the fact that like now Antonio and Simon and Tim, like Stefan, are working on this project, but like the point is to be inclusive, right? So like the reason to move it, for example, to the BSF would be to stress that like this is not a PyPy project. Like there are PyPy people involved, but it's not a PyPy project. It's not a Grout project, even though some comments come from Oracle.com. Email addresses and so on and so on. So like more input from people within CPython would be not only expected but like welcome, right? So like I don't think it should be kind of a worry that HPy tries to be this future API because it doesn't try to do it like kind of on its own, but to be part of this larger idea on like what would, for example, the perfect C API for CPython look like in like 10 years or so, right? So kind of from what I understood this week, sitting here as a CPython core developer, is like like the team here really invites external input and help. So when Antonio says like, well, we want to be official, it's not like the people in this room want to be official. It's like the project. Yes. So something that brings a CPI for multiple Python implementations wants to be official. This sort of thing.
So maybe we should have a conversation with BSF rather than with this group.
Yeah, I mean, like with the Python Foundation, whether they're fine with this, like I'm pretty sure they are, right? So like that would be relatively easy formally. We really kind of speak like now to Peter, Mark, and Victor here, like by just saying like kind of we don't want to just move the GitHub repo under BSF. Like that's not the point. Like literally the point is like and if the project can become something kind of if not official, then at least like notable within the CPython world as well, right? Better?
Right. My recommendation is write the documentation so people can actually use it, and then probably talk to or help Cyclone, Pio3, Swig, and these kinds of generators, which will get you a lot of extensions for basically free. And it's also something we have tried to convince people to do from the CPython side. Like, don't use the CPI directly, but use one of those code generators, which are easier to use. So maybe concentrate on those as well to get the adoption up.
Yeah, like I think Tim and Antonio like already like spoke to me about like doing all of those essentially as like one part of evolving the project, but another is like talking to Python because it would be irresponsible for Antonio to kind of go ahead and recommend extension authors to rewrite their extensions with HPy when it's not really sure, like whether, for example, CPython would not decide 2 releases from now to kind of, go against supporting it in some manner, right? So like, this is why we're having this conversation as well, like to show like what the project is about and that like it is actively trying to kind of bridge the gap between the interpreters that we have and also be easier on the extension maintainers. Yes, you have to rewrite, but like once you rewrite, then certain compatibility guarantees are now like in your reach that are better than the current CAPI today. So I agree with you better that like yes, documentation should be written and as much as we can, like generators like Cython should support HPy. That's all good. But at the same time, it won't be easy to convince anybody to support HPy unless like there is some sort of at least interest in activity on the CPython side, which is like the behemoth in the room of Python, right? Like if CPython is not interested, then it's going to be hard to convince say cryptography authors or NumPy authors or whatever else to actually switch to HPy.
Like so. My point of view, CPython has a stable API, and we are committed to not breaking that, although some people do want to break it. So if you use that, we promise to support you. And as for HPy as a project specifically, I think all of us here like the project, otherwise we wouldn't be here.
But we can't support the API forever because it does have some real issues. But so, I mean, we can promise that if people move to HPy, then when we do change it, they'll be covered. And I think that would be quite compelling.
Yeah, I think that would be awesome. Yeah, and I think that's exactly kind of what we need is just a little bit of commitment as a community to say like, okay, we're going to do our best to support this, and so we can ask people to use it. I mean, we are already. I mean, it's unfortunate that Marty couldn't attend the sprint, but he's working on a Cython port at the moment, and the NumPy port is already there. And we're speaking. I mean, we're not doing these in the dark. And we had a call 2 days ago with Sebastian Berg about NumPy port, and we've chatted to Stefan Binner about Cython port, and kind of everyone is keen, but we're all sort of looking at each other going, like, is this really going to happen? Like, are we really going to get like community support? Because as Łukasz said, this kind of feeling of like, if we change everything and we don't have commitment from the community, then it's a bit irresponsible because we make changes to projects that everyone is using, and then we have to back them out a year from now, and it'll be, it'll be a waste of time and awkward for everyone.
Which is what we actually say to Sebastian. Like a few months ago, I and Simon met him at SciPy in Austria, and he said, yes, I'm ready to merge pull request to migrate to HPy. And I said, yes, okay, fine. I don't want the one that breaks the NumPy because then tomorrow HPy stops to exist and NumPy breaks. I mean, we before doing that, we need to decide as a community, as a broader Python community, that this is the way to go.
But this sounds like
I think that it seems that we are all aligned from the general tone of this code.
I think we're all aligned, and as you know, an API maintainer, I don't see HPy as very different from another big project, right? You get the same kind of guarantees, and I don't think that's a problem. If you see something in CPython API or API breaking, then of course talk to us. That should be a PEP. That should have the backwards or the deprecation period. So you should definitely know about it, and you should be able to tell us, this breaks for us. Please give us another way of doing it or revert the change, and we'll be happy to do that not only for HPy but for any other project.
I mean, possibly we could add HPy to the list of things that CPython builds, and at least we could run our test suite and see if, the next version of CPython is breaking something in HPy. Or we could add or it'd be nice if the CPython core developers could see that too, but we could also just add it to our own CI.
Yeah, so adding non external stuff to the CPython test suite is quite complicated. So it probably would be better if you test with betas and file bugs for CPython or betas, nightlies or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, probably need nightlies. I mean, my thing is betas are kind of awkward because then it's sort of maybe been sitting there for 6 months and people don't feel like reverting a bunch of work, understandably.
Yeah. So sorry, I said that. Want nightlies or at least alphas. And of course, to add something to the stable ABI, then we should.
Question like maybe on that on Twitch.
No, I don't see any other questions on Twitch.
No, not on this.
Okay.
Oh, I think it got reset when the internet failed.
Oh, okay. That's why I don't see much.
I think Anthony asked if, or what's your thoughts on getting rid of the stable ABI?
Well, that's. I mean, the idea for us was if to get HPy working in this way, that then if CPython core developers were to decide, oh, well, we do want to get rid of it now, then that would be fine. Everybody who's migrated to HPy would be covered because we would just on the HPy project side, we would take care of, as I said earlier, we would take care of supporting ABI 3 and ABI 4, for example, with the same for those binaries. But we don't want to prescribe CPython get rid of the stable ABI because, I mean, it's nice for us too, as you said, but it's just more of a, hey, if this is successful, then you have the freedom you have more freedom to deprecate or remove certain things if you wanted to. But it's not this is not our, I mean, not our call at all.
I think practically what is likely to happen is that one compiles the CPython HPy implementation for every version of CPython.
Yes.
And then you don't need the stable API across major versions because you have stable HPy across versions. But that's not to say that the stable API should be removed. It's to say that HPy itself wouldn't necessarily need it, and it might reduce the need for it in the wider ecosystem if lots of people use HPy.
Yeah.
There is a question.
There's another question. So what if CPython removes the shell? Is HPy authors don't have to change the extensions? Well,
in theory, no. In theory, not. But then they will break because they probably rely on the guild internally.
Yeah,
Yes.
but I mean that's where it's exactly where these different HPy contexts and versions can help, right? Because let's call them legacy extensions, we can load them in a mode where the guild is still taken.
It's
they
taken
will be
around.
slowed, but they will work, right? And if they are recompiled with a new version, maybe they will also have to change their code because they will have to adapt to no guild. Then they might work as well. And you might be able to load two different extensions.
One with the guild,
one Python and one with support guild and the other one not.
Yeah. And then HPy would take care of taking its own lock around the old guild, expecting extensions just to make sure that those extensions that maybe used the guild as their own, basically relied on the guild as their lock So yes, in theory, yes. The theory is that this will work.
And very, very theoretically, you can also add an extension using the guild and extension using the no guild.
Yes.
Because the context is per extension. So
Yes.
then if we start about talking the guild, then we are really going to, there are lines.
Yeah, I mean, I think the HPy design fully supports this, but there will be a lot of just work and it will depend exactly on how the guild is removed and what the semantics end up looking like.
Yeah.
Practical details.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit like with sub interpreters, where the whole design of HPy has been sub interpreters should just work, but then if you look at C extensions, it's not only that they have like global state that is related to Python. They have global state that is just C global state that has nothing to do with Python, and even that breaks sub-interpreters sometimes. And then I mean that's something that the extension authors still need to deal with, because HPy just like no Python API can help them with that. And if a C extension relied on the GIL protecting its C structures where they're not even calling API, they're just like hoping that the GIL is taken, there's so much that HPy will be able to do, but maybe not everything. Okay. All right. We don't want to keep people over like versus time. Or is that
There's like
what was that?
there's follow-up question that we're not sure we follow exactly.
I don't see the questions here.
So yeah, like again, so Don, he's worried about if CPython decides to change specific implementation, and this is what we not follow now, is we should care both users. I'm not sure what are the both users, like the extension authors and the CPython co-developers?
Maybe, Tommy, could you just expand on the question a bit?
CPy and HPy. Okay.
I think you can look at the chart.
Oh, I
just
can.
open the chat and
I don't see my mouse. Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
My mouse was invisible earlier. So
I think the question is, if CPython decide to drop the GIL, then they also need to care about the HPy.
Yeah.
But probably
Maybe.
no. I mean, I think that the GIL would be such a big break in chain that it would be fine to say we also release a new version of HPy, and yes, the compatibility guarantee is less. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the existing C API is much harder to kind of maintain compatibility with because it exposes so much. I mean, for example, CPython could completely change the layout of kind of like
Use a different GC.
Star or use a different GC, and HPy would kind of largely not. I mean, we'd have to change the CPython implementation of HPy, but it would largely kind of not care, and we're very sure it will work because HPy already works for completely different GCs, completely different memory layouts. So I think kind of keeping the HPy implementation on top of the C API working is going to be fairly easy. I mean, the kind of changes that would make it hard are probably so big that it's okay, it's a small bit of work.
Like maybe in some like ideal long-term future, we would see like most of the extensions using HPy and extensions that are using C API would use C API for a reason, because they actually need to look into the details. And then if you change the details, you can't really, like the extension has to change also. Like say I have an extension that is producing some statistics about reference count changes. Like if CPython moves to a garbage collector, that extension just doesn't make sense anymore, right? It like inherently must change, not just because the API broke. Yeah. So in some ideal world, the fact that you are using C API would just inherently mean that you kind of need to change. You need to change, adapt your implementation to new CPython versions, because inherently you're using something that's internal to CPython. And also, you don't care about other Pythons because you are doing something CPython specific, right? But like 95% of the extensions don't have to be CPython specific.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Maybe also just wanted to say thank you very
Yes.
much to everyone, and this was super encouraging. And also thank you, Mark and Peter, for offering to take part in design discussions. would be really awesome.
Yes, from our point of view, like having a general good attitude from you, it's very nice and very.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, then.
So, thank you everybody.
Thanks everyone.
Goodbye.
Have a good afternoon or evening or day or
And
whatever time
goodbye-
zone it is.
Goodbye to all the people that are watching us on Twitch. I don't know how
Yes.
Bye.
Right. Bye.
See you, friends.
Okay, right. Bye then.
So